Hi guys, welcome to this Know How video. Just going to be talking a little bit about identifying fatigue in a session and what you can do about it in the session. And I think the salient point to remember really is that not every single session has to be a smash fest. You need to always have your mind on the bigger picture. If no one session is that important, so if you go too deep in one session, it may well have a knock-on effect to your future ability to train, and you'll need more recovery as a result. So it's really important to be able to identify this. And the reason I'm covering this now is because I experienced a really good example of how a fatigue can affect a session and how you can respond to it. It's one of the times I've got it right. Just a bit of context. So this morning is Tuesday mornings at the moment are our sessions that we do with our squad athletes. I trained with the squad today, and the session was very straightforward. 3 times 8 minutes at threshold at FTP. So nice kind of longer steady state threshold efforts. And yeah, it was pretty clear right from the off that I was tired. And the reason I'm tired is because 2 weeks ago I did Ironman Maastricht, had a good couple of weeks of recovery, mixture of pure and active recovery, and now I'm starting to get back into training to build towards a half Ironman I've got in a few weeks' time. Ideally, I wouldn't be training like this straight away, but got this half Ironman um, in quick succession. So yeah, I'm pretty much on notice that I'm going to have fatigue in my legs, and I have to be really careful about how I build into my training again. So just show you that the session as it came out on Training Peaks. So you see we had the warm up, fast building efforts, nice cruise period, and then we got these three threshold intervals. Kind of where my power should be is indicated by the blue overlay, top of which being the FTP point, and that's where my numbers should hit. So you see in the first one, just to mention, I was feeling pretty tired. Just even in the warm up, my legs just weren't spinning over as fast as they could. Woke up a little bit with the fast pedaling efforts, as my default cadence lifted a little bit. But yeah, I pretty much knew right from the start, and actually used this as a teaching point for the squad. Basically telling them what was going on with me as I was going through and all through the session, so that you can have like a almost real time lesson of how to deal with it when you've got accumulated fatigue. So you can see this first session, the set was all meant to be done in erg mode, so I stayed in erg mode, stuck with it. But I was talking to them as I was going through this. So my threshold heart rate is about 156 beats per minute. Halfway, within maybe 2 minutes, my heart rate had already gotten up to my threshold heart rate. And one thing that you should know is that there's actually quite a big lag time in heart rate. So really, actually, I should only be getting to around my threshold heart rate for a threshold interval, maybe 3, 4, 5 minutes in. So the fact that my heart rate was up to threshold within a couple of minutes told me something pretty much straight away. I mean, obviously, I was also feeling it. A threshold effort, according to our kind of RPE scale, should feel like an 8 out of 10 effort, with 10 being a full-on sprint. This did not feel like an 8 out of 10. So, it's clear to me pretty much straight from the start that this was going to be a tough session, and that I needed to manage things actively rather than try and be a slave to the session plan. For this first interval there, I kept it in erg mode, and I just kind of watched my heart rate rise, and I talked to the guys about what was going on. Immediately I was above threshold, got up to around 166, so 10 beats above my threshold heart rate. So actually what I was doing was shifting above kind of zone 4, this threshold effort, into more like kind of VO2 max, and potentially even shifting into an anaerobic effort. I'll talk about that, why that's significant at the end. So yeah, my heart rate was massively elevated through this interval, and then when we got down to the recovery interval, I just turn on heart rate. Hopefully you'll be able to see, but you can see my heart rate still staying around 130. For this length of interval, which I think is 5 minutes of recovery, I should be down to about 100 beats per minute by the end of this recovery interval. And I just, at no point do I get there. So that again is a second sign. Not only was my heart rate, you can see, well up to around threshold heart rate very quickly, but then in recovery intervals, it just didn't drop below kind of like a 125, 130 beats per minute baseline, and it should have been much lower. So that again was another kind of trigger warning for me. So I knew I definitely had to actively manage the next couple of intervals because it's a threshold session. So my heart rate needs to be around threshold. It doesn't really matter what my power tells me. I need to be at and around my threshold heart rate to be able to kind of fulfill the session goal. So into this second interval, actively managed it. Started out at kind of dropping it down to about 300 watts, and then quickly, and as my heart rate got back into the 160s, I was like, right, that's not low enough. So dropped it down to kind of like a tempo sweet spot effort. So somewhere between 85 and 90% of FTP. And eventually, you can see my heart rate still stays around, it flatlines. So it's no longer kind of picking up anymore, but it's still high. And again, during recovery interval, stays above about 125. So still not recovering properly. I even dropped my power down in the recovery interval to try and help it a little bit, and it helped a touch, but still wasn't the best. So on the final interval, no messing around, straight back down to that lower power target, and you can see stabilizes around 160, but still above threshold really. So the damage was kind of done in that first interval. So for me, that's quite a clear example, and it's easier to identify this stuff because it's nice steady state intervals. You can see what's going on with your heart rate. You know roughly where it should be, and if it's above that, it's much easier to spot. If you've got a more dynamic session with lots of intervals, lots of chopping and changing power targets, it's obviously harder to spot those kind of warning signs. But I think it's just really important to kind of see this stuff almost in action and to hear it from an experienced rider, a coach, and actually see that they are working to their own kind of teachings, and have the confidence to do it yourself. As I said earlier, not every single session should be a smash fest. The harder you go, the deeper you go. So if I had kept to these intervals as planned and been riding at 165, 170 beats per minute, I would have been basically at VO2 max, if not anaerobic. And suddenly I'm not using the same energy systems. I'm using, anaerobic energy systems, burning through glycogen. I haven't got that significant aerobic component that comes with working at and around your aerobic threshold. Okay, so if I'd stayed true to the plan, I wouldn't have actually been fulfilling what the plan wanted me to do. I would have been going a lot deeper, I would have required a lot more recovery. I'm feeling actually quite good now, but chances are I would have been pretty much gassed for the day, and training tomorrow, how would that have gone? Probably not well. So yeah, you've got to be intelligent about this stuff. You've got to look after yourself. It's always about stringing sessions together rather than this one session being kind of, oh, that's my high intensity session of the week. I've got to do it perfectly. It doesn't work like that. Always got to tag this stuff together. So yeah, I just thought that might be interesting. A context specific example of how to manage fatigue and still have a higher quality session. And I'll be honest, I felt like I dealt with it pretty well. Not perfectly. Ideally I would have taken the power down even more, so that my heart rate came right back down to that 155, 156 beats per minute. But at least it's illustrative of how you can handle a session. And I felt like I was working in at the right effort by the end of it. There you go. Any questions, do feel free to email us. Do feel free to drop us a line on social media. But hopefully relatively interesting example of how you can manage fatigue in a session.